Hello, Sooner Nation, OU Insider subscribers, Coach Bryan Clinton enthusiasts, people who, as we record this on Thursday evening, are still excited about a pretty good Wednesday night in Hoops Land for Oklahoma, with not only an OU win over Georgia, but also a Thunder win over the Celtics. Obviously, the OU plays tonight in like 2 hours against Kentucky. But that's a whole... This is the podcast for you. This is another episode of the Oklahoma Drill, podcast fueled by OU Insider and the Rivals Network. I am Jesse Crittenden, and I'm joined as always by Bryan Clinton as we rebrand ourselves as the white t-shirt bros.
Yeah.
We didn't even choreograph this.
Nope. It's just, it happens. It's that telepathy. We got to be somewhere around episode 100 at this point, right? Like we're getting close.
I think we've only missed 1 week, and we didn't even, that's a lot. And we started in September of 23.
Okay. So we still got a little bit. But
we're in the 70s.
Yeah. Somewhere in that area.
Something like that.
Yeah. Flea has been on every episode. Well, I guess not technically, because we've
not every
done some
episode
on the road, but most of them, and I appreciate him. So
I've been meaning for like a year now to set up the dozens and dozens of credentials I've had covering OU from not only OU but the different games and stuff we go to. Set it up on a board, make it real professional, like Parker has it. That would require me
like this. That's
yep,
a really sad attempt at what Parker does back here.
You not only have that, but you have the other background stuff. This has been my background has been a Chili Peppers poster for a year now.
There is nothing wrong with that.
I mean, I would agree with you there. I would agree with you. But I actually was particularly focused on my t-shirt because I think the last two pods, because the last Oklahoma drill and then the quick slants we did on Sunday about softball was wearing the same t-shirt in both those videos.
Plain white tees.
Well, it was a different one. It's like tan. And I was like, I'm probably the only one that notices, but I noticed my girlfriend said something. So anyways, it's just a...
No, you're good, man.
Hey, so I mean, again, we're recording this on Thursday, but pretty good 24 hours in basketball land. We're not talking about basketball today, but OU Hoops got a huge win.
Maybe, it wouldn't be the craziest thing ever if they add on to that. I mean, beating Kentucky in the SEC tournament would be pretty awesome. They're already but the good thing is they've locked themselves in. They're going dancing, like getting that win over Georgia pretty much locks them in. And then, we discussed it earlier on the phone. The Thunder win was huge. Like going into Boston and winning that and winning the way that they did. Like, I mean, pretty awesome.
Yeah, to do it without Jalen Williams. And actually, I wanted to also, because I think Brandon and I are going to start a Thunder pod, I think pretty soon.
Nice.
I don't even know if I'm supposed to be saying that. Well, it's fine. It's fine.
Breaking news.
Just to see if anybody, we obviously cover OU specifically, and not only primarily, but specifically. But I have season tickets with another reporter on the beat, Ryan Chapman from Sooners on SI. You're a Thunder fan. Brandon is a big Thunder fan that also goes to games. So we thought, hey, especially during the, when fall football's not going on, if we've got a day, record a Thunder pod, we can.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have you on as a guest.
There you go.
But we're here to talk about football. And actually, we're here to talk about football and softball. But we're here to talk about football because we got to go to another open practice on Monday. We are in the thick of spring practices now. How many? 5 or 6? I think 5 or 6 practices.
Yeah.
Practices started last week, and we're in the middle of spring practices. And after getting to go to a couple open practices, I've really thought about spring football is, we've said it, it's unofficial sunshine pumping season. It always is. Yeah. I have tried to combat that as much as I can. And so, but, and in the spirit of that, there's some questions that I do think, even though the spring is, it's really just an opportunity for some new guys to get acclimated and, for a couple of these new coaches to get adjusted. And there's so much that can happen between now and training camp, obviously. But I do think actually with this season, with all the newness and with just how big next season is going to be, I do think there are some important, I think you and I both think there are some important things that OU needs to get figured out now, that by the end of spring, questions that they had on certain things heading into spring, maybe don't need to be completely answered, but they need to have a better idea of where things are at the end of spring compared to where they started. So yeah. I tasked you and I both to come up with 2 to 3 to 4 questions that we have right now about this team that need to have a pretty good answer by the end of spring. I don't know what you picked. You don't know what I picked. That's going to be part of the fun, but we're going to go back and forth on what our questions are and discuss them. And Bryan, because I am such a humble co-host of this pod, I'm going to go first. So I know, anyways, you go ahead. You go first. Okay. You tell me, doesn't even have to be your biggest question, but you tell me a question mark you have, and I'll see if I have the same question.
So I'm going to preface this with last year, the answer would have been Deion Burks. The answer to this question would have been Deion Burks. So with that kind of, for context, which newcomer stands out above the rest? Who is the guy coming out of spring that you added? And John Mateer doesn't count. Like that's the obvious question. Like that's the obvious answer. You need him to stand out above the rest. But who else is going to be a difference maker among the newcomers? And it could be a freshman if you feel you have a freshman that's gonna make the difference. But guys, I've got a few names. Giovanni Gibson is a guy. Marvin Jones Jr. is a guy, potentially. Kendall Daniels, Isaiah Satania, Derek Simmons, just new guys that you expect to play a major role, not named John Mateer.
I like that. It's a couple of those names you mentioned were a part of a couple of the questions I have, but I like the approach of talking about the newcomers as a whole. And I'm going to use that to say, this spring in particular feels like a bigger opportunity for some of those newcomers. And part of that is because of injuries. Part of that is because of guys that have either hit the portal or moved on. And you mentioned some of them there. I mean, think about where we were with this wide receiver room a year ago.
Yeah.
Think about how many names were in that room. And you, outside of Deion Burks, you knew, it just seemed like that was going to be the deepest wide receiver room in the country. And then the team was cursed or
something.
Yeah. But yeah, so, and I want to talk a little bit about that wide receiver room that you mentioned. Giovanni Gibson, he's the name right now that has stood out the most to me. He just has in that wide receiver room specifically. And part of that is, again, Deion Burks has been limited. Jaden Gibson has not participated in practices right now, or as of now, with an injury. It's given guys like Giovanni Gibson and Isaiah Zategna a chance to shine, but it's really you were going to need a couple of those guys to make a jump anyways. And Giovanni Gibson's really interesting in how he was an interesting addition because he seems like a Swiss Army guy in terms of where you can put him. I was mentioning this to you before we started recording. Again, this is not official. This is just the closest thing in an open practice setting that we have seen to anything resembling a first-team offense. The 3 receivers in that group, Isaiah Zategna, Giovanni Gibson, and Manny Choice, true freshman receiver, Manny Choice, who is also put a pin in Manny Choice for now. It's two newcomers. And I mean, I think this wide receiver room has been interesting to analyze because you've got so many names, not only names, but guys that, I mean, like last year was so hard to evaluate some of those freshmen back then. I mean, that last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ivan Carrion and Zion Reagans and Zion Kearney, how are they going to fit into things? I would say right now, I think Giovanni Gibson is going to be a starter.
Yeah.
I think he's a pretty clear lock. I do.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
This could be old takes exposed in 6 months, but
It could be. I mean, we sat here and did the same thing last year with, like you just said, with the wide receiver room, talked about how it might be the deepest in the country. And here we are.
yeah.
Giovanni Gibson. I mean, that does. There's been talk. It doesn't matter who you've asked. Difference of opinions. It hasn't mattered. The noise has been Giovanni Gibson out of that room. And Manny Choice, going back to not just his high school film, but some of the breakdowns that I did of him. I just remember seeing him, and immediately you could tell that like the guy's different. Now, does that translate? Does he become a superstar in college football? Who knows? But I mean, as far as the raw talent, it's there. I am curious. Last year we saw, and this is something, I guess this kind of goes into another question of mine, which I won't ask it right now, but is a guy like Marvin Jones Jr. finally the one that gives Oklahoma another another rusher, another pass rusher that can go and be a cross for Amar Mason Thomas? Like, is that the kind of guy? Is he a guy that can do that? So, really interesting. And I think you need newcomers to hit if you're going to take the next step. You're going to need a couple of those guys to hit. Obviously, John Mateer, but it sounds like they've hit on a couple of them at least this early on.
Yeah. And I think that wide receiver room is going to be one to watch as we go on. I got to talk to Manny Choice at the Newcomer Media Day before spring practice to start. I was really impressed by getting to talk with him. Also, that was the first time I'd really gotten to actually like be close to him in person. He's bigger than I thought he was. And even with, you would presume that Deion Burks and Jaden Gibson are starters or big snaps kind of guys, especially Deion, right? Yeah. But I was impressed to see Manny Choice getting a real look in practice. I mean, he's running with an offensive line that looks like it resembles a starting group. It's running with John Mateer. So yeah, I mean, and we're going to talk about some other newcomers as we go along, but that wide receiver room, I think they did hit on Gibson. I do. At the very least, I think they hit on Giovanni Gibson.
It makes you wonder with how loud the noise, and again, everything has to be taken with a grain of salt because it's spring, but it makes you wonder how in the heck a guy like that, no offense to Arkansas Pine Bluff, but how does a guy that stands out that much at practice in Norman end up at a place like Arkansas Pine Bluff? Like, I know that in today's game where evaluations are a click away, you're not having to go and physically see the guy in person. It's just wild that still happens.
It is, but I think the thing I always try to remind myself is just that you could be the most talented person with all kinds of gifts, intangibly, physically, whatever the answer is. I mean, most of the time, do those guys get found? Sure. But not all paths to a Power 4 school are created equal. There's all kinds of circumstances. There's all kinds of reasons why guys either are correctly noticed and then don't pan out, or guys that aren't correctly noticed and then eventually pan out. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. I got a question. I'm just dying to ask this question for my first one. You know what it is? I'm dying to ask.
Yeah.
I need some damn clarity on the running back room. I need it. If there's been anything if there's been anything that has irked me for the last 2 years, and it's going to irk me again, Brian, it's going to irk me again.
Currently irking.
I'm irked. It's that running back rotation. And because I go out to open practice and no Javonte Barnes. So, and again, it's early in spring. We're still a month away from the Crimson Combine, which is just going to be, you know what? I'll save those thoughts for another day. So I knew it's early. There's a lot of things that can change. Caleb Hicks, as you correctly pointed out when we talked about this off air, was the darling of spring last year. I really thought he was going to have a role in the fall. That did not happen. But the rotation has basically been the same. It's been in the individual drills, at least. It's Gavin Sawchuk, Sam Franklin, Xavier Robinson. Taylor Tatum has sometimes been running fifth. On Monday, it was Gabe Sawchuk getting fourth reps, which makes me have, and part of it is, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to Sam Franklin, who was awesome at UT Martin before he got to Oklahoma, but I mean, I would have thought that with what Xavier Robinson and Taylor Tatum showed last year, that those aren't your third and fourth string guys, even at this point in spring.
Yep.
Right. Yep. But it's Gavin Sawchuk leading that room, and it's Sam Franklin getting some real looks in that second team spot. And so part of it is, well, look, I remain a Gavin Sawchuk believer that when he's healthy and everything's right, that he can be a very productive running back.
Yep.
I do. I am naturally skeptical about Sam Franklin, and I just the last 2 years we have seen oddities and weirdness in that running back rotation, and there's no doubt that DeMarco Murray can recruit. There's no doubt about that. There's talented guys in that room. The potential is off the charts. It has not been what I expected to see, and I'm very curious about how that room shakes out by the end of spring. That is the most diplomatic way I can put it, Brian.
Yeah,
that's my question.
I love that question, because I mean, you kind of threw me off completely that Taylor Tatum was running fives. And again, it's spring. There's so much. I mean, it may mean nothing in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, I mean, that room, if Sam Franklin's taking the second team reps right now, it doesn't mean nothing.
No,
I mean, it doesn't mean, I mean, it's not completely pointless. So, yeah, I feel like at the end of the year, it wasn't going out on a limb to say your best, your most productive guy that stood out the most in that room was Xavier Robinson to end the year. And then all of a sudden, did he even touch the field in the bowl game? He had a couple of snaps, I think, but like,
I want to say he had 14 snaps, but he barely played in that second half. Like, yeah. I mean, he barely played for the game, but then barely played after halftime. Yeah. It was the Gavin Sawchuk show.
Yeah. Yep. That's that kind of just, it doesn't sit well with, I think it irks me too. I think that's the best way of putting it.
We're both irked.
We're both irked. That's right. It's odd because I think even as a young guy, you could tell he was the most physical. He was you knew you were gaining positive yardage. Like those were the things that stood out. And then the rotation gets thrown for a loop again. So yeah, unfortunately, Jesse, I'm not sure we will have any answers about just if we're going off of history. I'm not sure we will have a whole lot of answers about that by the end of spring. But man, it sure would be nice. I mean, it would be really nice to know what the rotation was going to look like, at least in theory. But there's no doubt. You just said it. DeMarco Murray is excellent at bringing in talent. The room is stacked. Most of those guys in that room could have gone pretty much anywhere they wanted in the country. And they all decided to come to Oklahoma. He's been able to retain most of that, which is impressive in and of itself, with all the guys that are in that room. But my goodness, like there needs to be this year. There needs to be production, and I think most Oklahoma fans would prefer, whether or not it matters, I don't know, that it's a pretty clear 1-2 guys, letting them kind of get their wheels turning, I guess, if that's the best way I can put it. It to me, that's probably the most, outside of maybe quarterback, that's probably the most rhythmic
Yeah.
position on the offensive side of the ball. Like, you need to have, if you have some rhythm and you're able to get going, I think that's when you're going to see your best. There hasn't been rhythm outside of the anomaly that was Xavier Robinson against Alabama. There just wasn't any kind of rhythm last year. And I think that it probably extends back to when Gavin Sawchuk finally had a rhythm in the last 5 games of the 2023 season.
No, and that's why, I mean, again, I don't think this is an answer that needs to be 100% set in stone by the end of spring, but you can't have weird. I mean, both the last 2 years, the running back or the production as a rushing offense was below average.
Yes.
And finally got a rhythm as the year went on. You can't have that this year in 2020. Yeah. Like, you can't have that in 2025. You can't. And part of this is going to be dependent on Ben Arbuckle's offense and how he wants to utilize that running back room and who's a better fit. And Sam Franklin could end up making me look like a fool, by the end of the fall. And again, this also makes it tough because you don't have Javonte Barnes as a full participant throughout all of spring. But I want to have a good idea of where that room is, and I want the reasoning to make logical sense. Is that a good way to put it? I think that's a good way to put it.
Yes.
Tell me your next question.
Unfortunately, I think it might be too much to ask. Well, this is a perfect segue because you just mentioned the rushing attack. Is the offensive line markedly better at the end of spring than it was coming into it? I think that question in and of itself, like, the entire premise of Oklahoma having success in 2025 is going to depend on whether or not the offensive line takes a big jump.
Yeah.
Like, if that doesn't happen, if you're better everywhere else, but the offensive line is exactly what it was last year, you're not winning more games. It's just not going to happen. There are so many things that get tossed around about football, about the SEC. You have to be good along the line of scrimmage. You can't hide it. There's no masking it. There's no anybody. The gimmicks run out whenever you're playing the kinds of athletes that you are on the other side of the ball every single week. And I think if Oklahoma is going to have the kind of season that they're hoping to, a resurgent season, the offensive line is going to have to be, it's going to have to be top half of the league. Like, they're going to have to be one of the better offensive lines in the SEC if they're going to reach that goal. This kind of plays into that. But if that offensive line is better, is it because some of those younger guys are playing a bigger role than maybe expected? Eddie Pierre-Louis is a guy that has made a little bit of noise. Just, he's showing up a little bit, and obviously looks good, has looked the part, but is a guy that a lot of people are hoping can push to play a guard position. And, like, if he comes out and he solidifies and absolutely locks down the left guard spot, like, I think the offensive line as a whole looks way better. So it's just, there's a lot of nuance to that question. And I know that there's a lot of ways of saying yes or no, they could be better. But to me, the unit as a whole, it's got to look better than it did last year at this at this juncture, and really just got to stay healthy.
No, I agree. And I'm glad you mentioned Eddie Pierre-Louis, who is a guy that is getting some first team action right now. And part of that is, I mean, it was kind of a bummer to hear Brent Venables announce before practices started that you weren't going to have Logan Howland and Heath
Yeah.
Ozaida for all of spring, which not only is a bummer because those are two guys that could start in the fall, but also at the same time, it was going to be an opportunity immediately for Eddie Pierre-Louis, Isaiah Autry-Dent, Michael Fasusi, Ryan Foje, just young guys in that room, Daniel Akinkume, guys to step up in that room. And part of it is also, I think it's not only just about needing that room to be better and I think needing some of those young guys to grow really quickly. I think part of it is also, I mean, there's still question marks like where are Jacob Sexton and Jake Taylor at? Not only health wise, but for Jacob Sexton, who split his time just about 50-50 at left guard and left tackle. Where is he working at? And is he still a starter? Are he and Jake Taylor still starters or presumed starters when they're healthy? Is that still, because I mean, Heath Ozaida and Logan Howland didn't set the world on fire last year, but you saw growth towards the end of the year. But also, I mean, Eddie Pierre-Louis is, I mean, those are, Michael Fasusi doesn't look like a true freshman. He just does go out to practice, stand next to him. He doesn't look like one.
Ryan Foje doesn't look like
No, he doesn't. And so, I mean, I think I have questions not only about that unit as a whole in terms of how productive they can be, but I mean, outside of Troy Everett at center and probably Fabechi Wiwu at right guard, you could tell me a bunch of different things could happen.
Yep.
And hell, I mean, really, as far as like set in stone, it's probably just Troy Everett at center. Probably.
I agree. I agree with you on that.
So this is when it's also going to be interesting to see guys like Luke Buklenko.
Yep.
Some of those other new guys that are in that room. Owen Hollenbach as a true freshman.
Derek Simmons.
Derek Simmons. So, I mean, there's other guys in that room that it's just, I think this spring, by the end of it, they need to have a better idea of how high the ceiling of this group can be, but also where is everybody? Is Jake Taylor and Jacob Sexton, are they still starters? I don't know. Probably. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, and that's the other interesting wrinkle in all of this is it's not going to look entirely different. Schematic wise, it's not, the scheme isn't going to look just completely different than anything you've ever seen at Oklahoma, but there will be nuances and things in this new offense that maybe puts a guy in a position to start that he wouldn't have been otherwise. If there's more, an example, like I guess an easiest example would be if you're running a lot of outside zone or you're running a lot of plays that require your guards to get an open space. Eddie Pierre-Louis probably moves better than some of the other guys in the room. I mean, we've seen it, and if that's the case, he's probably going to have a better opportunity to start. Now, I don't know that that's the case. I have no idea. That's just, I'm using that as an example. Things change, nuances change with new offenses, and at the end of the week or at the end of spring ball, you want to see. I don't know that you necessarily have to have a starting five, but you want to say, yeah, we're in a better spot now than we were when the season ended.
I agree. I'm gonna throw another question at you.
Let's do it.
Considering the linebacker room, and specifically the depth in that linebacker room, I think is maybe an under the radar. Well, not an under the radar to like diehard OU fans, but an under the radar SEC or national storyline is what does the linebacker depth look like for this room? I mean, you're not just losing Danny Stutzman, but I mean, you lost Dasan McCullough and Lewis Carter, who were going to be, I mean, McCullough at the very least, but I think Lewis Carter too. Those were going to be two guys that were going to play a ton of snaps. And then you add on Jaren Kanak moving to tight end. I mean, this move makes sense for Jaren Kanak for a billion different reasons, and I think one of them is that I don't know what the path to playing time was going to be for him. I think that linebacker experiment had kind of run its course, but
Mhm.
he was still going to be entering as a fourth year guy in the system who was going to be in contention for some snaps. And so I think it's not only what does the linebacker depth look like behind those guys, but also what ends up happening at Cheetah. Is Kendall
Mm.
Dolby still your starting Cheetah if and when he's healthy? And even then, if he's the starter, who is actually playing behind him?
Right.
Because I mean, I think, Kendall Daniels has been an interesting name, obviously, for just how many different positions he played at Oklahoma State, how many snaps he logged. I mean, he was on the defensive line, he was at linebacker, he was at safety. So the versatility has been interesting. I've seen him work primarily at will. I think he'll also get some time at Cheetah. I've seen him at will. I've seen him and Sammy Omasigo both getting time at the Mike and Will. And I would, and I thought, Samuel Masigo almost strictly played Cheetah last year.
Mm.
So is he still getting looked at Cheetah? How about someone like Reggie Powers
Mm.
at that Cheetah
Yeah.
spot? So it's not that I don't like the names. I like the names, and if you roll into next season with a presumed starting group of Kobe McKenzie, Kip Lewis, and probably Kendall Dolby, you feel pretty good about that linebacker room. Kendall Dolby
Yeah.
was arguably the best defensive player for OU last year before he got hurt.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
you can feel good about that room. I'm just curious, what does the depth look like behind them? And where's everybody playing? Because the other side of it is, even if I like the names, you don't have a ton of experience
Yeah.
behind that presumed starting group.
Yeah.
So I loved seeing Nate Drailing work with that Cheetah room. That was one of the best parts of going to open practice on Monday. That he's just really fun and entertaining to watch. He's very hands-on. He's very passionate. He's very emotional. I loved watching it. So I feel good about who's coaching that room. But
Yeah.
what does everything look like behind that presumed starting group? And is that starting group I mean, what if Kendall Daniels earns the starting Cheetah job?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know. That's a question I have.
Yeah. No, I like that. It's actually a miracle that I don't. That's not one of the questions I had written down. I am very curious what that room looks like because not only do you have, I mean, I think we could both agree it would be absolutely shocking if Kobe McKenzie and Kip Lewis are not on the field with your starting group. Like those two, I feel pretty confident in saying that those guys are going to be on the field with the ones. Um, we saw last year some of the package specific stuff where if you needed more of a Sam linebacker, you go with a bigger guy like Deson McCullough. If you need the extra guy in open space to cover, Kendall Dolby was your guy. Um, Kendall Daniels is just so intriguing to me.
Yeah,
Like,
he
dude,
is.
he's 6'5", 240 pounds. Like, he moves well. Uh, he's very versatile. Has a ton of experience. I mean, like, dude's played a lot of ball. Um, and then Taylor Heim is a guy that looks like he's ahead of schedule. Just really long athletic room and guys that I think could play all sorts of roles. A very versatile group. And so the names, like you said, love the names. Some of the experience isn't necessarily there, but maybe I'm crazy by saying this because I do think Danny Stutzman obviously is one of the better linebackers Oklahoma's ever had. But at least from a athletic standpoint, I think your room as a whole might be better off now than it was last year. Like strictly athletically. Now, experience plays a huge role in that. But
I got asked this on the radio about yesterday I got asked about not only the potential of the defense, but is there an expectation that they will take a step back next year? And I said, no, that's
Yeah.
not my expectation. I said, and I think this applies specifically to the linebacker room. I said, I think next year there is a bigger difference between ceiling and floor than there was last year.
Yeah.
And I think I compare that to the linebacker room as well. And I think part of it is a name that we didn't mention who might be outside of Kendall Daniels, might be the most intriguing guy in that linebacker room is James Nesta.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is because he looks good. He's a second year in the system. But also, OU might need him. They might need him to play snaps next
Yeah.
year. Not like 50 a game, but like 10 to 15 to 20. Unless you're playing Kobe McKenzie and Kip Lewis every snap,
Yeah.
which I just don't think they're going to do. Not every snap. You need guys behind those two guys
Yeah.
to play snaps.
Yeah.
So part of it is intriguing. And you mentioned a couple of those other names. They're exciting, but like, I don't know if this is a year where you can say, oh man, it'd be really cool if James Nesta took a leap. It might be actually, we kind of need him now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I think if everything hits, I think this defense can be better than it was last year. I also think it's possible not everything hits and there is a step back.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, when you look at that linebacker room losing Danny Stutzman, like, would it be shocking to anyone if OU's not as good at linebacker next year? No.
Right.
But could that room end up forming together, like you said, with athleticism and length and look really good and be just as productive, if not more so? That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
It wouldn't.
Well, and it goes into kind of my next question.
Give it to me.
So if you've been on Twitter, if you followed anything, the weight gains on this team were significant, but like the defensive line in particular was just like kind of mind blowing, and it showed up at practice. I mean, PJ, I'm gonna let you say his last name. Adibara looks a whole lot like he just looks bigger, and it continues to get bigger. Like fills out the frame. If you took a picture of what he looked like when he got to Norman versus now, I mean, he is filled out. I mean, he's massive. But he's not the only one. Like David Stone is well above 300 pounds. You just go up and down. Danny Okoye looks. He was an impressive athlete coming in, but my goodness, like Dominic Williams looks the part. Like they all just look bigger. And I'm curious, does that translate? Does that size translate to that group taking a step? And I think if it takes a step, it goes from being great to being dominant. Because while Oklahoma's defensive line last year, I would say they had a great season. Comparatively, it's the best season the defensive line's had in more than a decade. Like, I mean, just they controlled the line of scrimmage for the most part. Late games after being on the field as much as they were, like, sure, some of the statistics are a little bit skewed, but overall, the group, it was fantastic. Like very far down the list of reasons why Oklahoma lost games.
From top to bottom, maybe the most solid.
Position. I mean, yeah, they were great. But I also say that with knowing there's a chance that they could take another step. Like if David Stone becomes the guy he was supposed to be, like, and I'm not saying he was behind, he was a true freshman last year, but if he takes a step and progresses, if PJ Adibare looks like the guy that you expected him to coming out of high school, if Danny Okoye continues to look the way he did, the way he has during spring this point, if Jaden Jackson, I mean, I know he's not practicing full go right now, I don't think, but if he just continues, like this group could legitimately go from being great to elite, like a truly elite top 1, 2, 3 lines in the country. And I don't think you're jumping out on a limb that far by saying that. can they take that step? Do we see some of that play a role going into the latter parts of spring?
I would say I agree. I would say there's a couple of small things that I'm curious about with the defensive line, and one of them is as incredibly solid as the interior was, and it was just rock solid from top to bottom. It was great. I think they need someone to emerge as like a real difference maker, like a real,
Like
because
like a real three tech, like a
yes,
Dexter Lawrence was for
yes,
yes, yep.
I think they need like they kind of got you by committee last year. I think they need like you mentioned David Stone. It'd be great if he took another step. I look specifically at Dominic Williams, who I think was really solid, but they need one of those guys, I think, to take a real leap, to take that interior from good to really good.
Yeah.
The other question I have is that opposite defensive end spot next to our Mason Thomas, because it's losing Ethan Downs, don't let that go under the radar to anybody out there. It's a huge loss, and it's not only just because of his leadership, but he was just really solid. He wasn't a superstar, he wasn't elite, he was just really solid.
You knew exactly what you were getting every time he stepped out on the field.
Yeah, consistent and solid, but they need, and also losing Caden Woolard. I mean, you're basically losing two of your four,
Trace Ford,
two of your three, and also Trace Ford. But you're losing two of your three main defensive ends because Danny Okoye wasn't ready and PJ spent a lot of last year hurt. It's probably going to be Marvin Jones Jr. In terms of veteran experience and in terms of consistency, he's probably that guy. But like, OU really needs PJ to take that leap. They need him to have the R. Mason Thomas third year leap.
And there are signs like that's potentially happening.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still really early, but
no. And so, but like, and not only do they need like a guy to really emerge as a star or as a really good starter, but I mean, this is like, I mean, Danny Okoye, the snaps are there if he's ready.
Yep.
The snaps are there for Danny Okoye. So
right.
I think the only other thing, and I'll just mention this at the end because it's so obvious, but that tight end room is wide open in terms of a billion ways that it could go.
Yep.
And I'm no closer really to guessing what's going to happen in that room. Carson Kent seems to be a guy that is kind of floating on the radar as if you put, not a gun to my head, if you put a less threatening but still threatening
toes to the fire.
Yes.
There you go.
Toes in really hot water.
There you
go. Like enough to be like, this is like the worst, but like I'm not like super uncomfortable.
How about like really cold water? Like if you put my toes to an ice bath.
Yeah. Like for like the first minute, I'm fine, and then eventually I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. So like, there I'll answer your question because I don't. This isn't the most favorite thing I've ever done. I would say it's Carson Kent. He's probably your starting tight end if I had to guess. But Jaren Kanak, I mean, what is his role in this offense if he has one? Devon Mitchell is unquestionably the highest ceiling, lowest floor guy in this room. John Locke, Cade McIntyre. It's just, a lot of
Renee Washington at some point, but still young.
A lot of unknowns in that room. And I think, and it's like, it's so obvious, right? The tight end room has been the punching bag of this program for the last 2 years. So like, I'm not reinventing the wheel by saying that. I think it's more about like, it is so wide open, right? Because even that wide receiver room, like even if you've got a lot of new faces, you can already have a rough idea of what that wide receiver room is going to look like. I really have no idea about that tight end room. I don't.
Yep.
And so I think that's part of like, and that is not ideal when it's been the punching bag of this program the last 2 years. And that is not only the biggest question mark, but also the room with a ton of options, and none of them are amazing right now at on March 13th. So I think I'm just like, can Joe John Finley make this room into an asset and not another punching bag? Can you do
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I've made this comparison before, but it just continues to gain more and more traction in my mind. Um, Cooper Mathers. Nobody, I'm sure there are people who know that name if they've gone back and watched what Washington State did last year. He's 6'2", 230 pounds. Who does that sound like already? He wasn't necessarily like an inline tight end. He played more like an H-back role, but it's something that we saw a lot of from Ben Arbuckle last year. He had 13 receptions for 6 touchdowns, 196 yards on the season. Like, if that's what Jaren Kanak becomes, holy cow! Like, I mean, that opens up everything. Now, I mean, it's not a crazy stat line. 13 receptions isn't that big, but half of them going for touchdowns is huge. I could see that. The downside to that is, like you just said, it's been the punching bag of this offense for a couple of years now. And after what we saw last year, it's a it was bad. I mean, there was just no way around it. It was a bad room. And this time last year, we thought that we thought that there were answers, and it really seemed as if there were. So I don't know. I think a lot of that goes into continuity. Like, there was a lot of changes going on mid-season. Maybe you chalk it up to that. But yeah, tight end rooms is as wide open a position right now as I think there is on the team, and I have no idea. That was one of the questions I had written down as well.
Real quick here before we transition to softball, you want to give if you had anything else on your list, if you wanted to give an elevator pitch?
But there was, and I'm having a hard time finding it right now because I'm under a lot of pressure here. Um,
I'll say or go ahead if you got it.
there is one thing, and this is actually not player specific.
Okay.
So last year we saw a lot more 3-man fronts defensively. Historically, Brent Venables is a 4-man front guy. Has done a lot more even fronts, and I'm curious if he goes back to that. That to me, with him being in charge of calling the defense, to me that's something intriguing. I would like to know if Oklahoma is going to have more 4-man fronts, because if it does, that affects the linebackers that you have on the field. That affects how you're going to deal with the secondary, with the cheetah position. Like, it changes everything compared to what you had last year. So it changes a lot, but it's also really not that different for the guys that are on the field. It's like, it's not a huge transition in responsibility. So
I like that. Let's talk about softball.
let's do it.
Oklahoma goes to Arkansas. They go to Fayetteville, Arkansas this weekend for a showdown with number 15 Arkansas. I will be in Fayetteville. So actually, by the time people listen to this on Friday morning, I will be en route to Fayetteville to cover this series. And we recapped the series last weekend against South Carolina. People should go check out our quick slants that we did on Sunday night, Monday morning. If you guys want to hear our thoughts on that. As I approach this series, Brian, a lot of it's kind of similar. This is just in terms of the statistical profiles of these teams, where South Carolina, great offense, average defense and pitching staff. Although I thought South Carolina's defense played pretty well all things
Yeah.
considered. Arkansas, statistically better offense and a statistically similar to slightly below South Carolina's defense. I think they're 31st in ERA. This is a South Carolina offense that ranks second in batting average. They rank second in scoring offense. They rank ninth in batting average, second in on base percentage, sixth in slugging percentage, seventh in total walks. 6 of their starters have a batting average of 360 or better. And they are led by Bree Ellis, who, just like last weekend, Quincy Lilio at that time led the country in batting average and on base percentage. Bree Ellis now leads the country in on base percentage, slugging percentage, and home runs. 13 home runs. She ranks 5th in batting average. And this is a Arkansas offense that's kind of been all over the place, Brian. They scored, I want to say they scored 4 runs in the first 2 games last weekend against Ole Miss and got blown out both games. Then they turn around in game 3 and put up 20 runs against Ole Miss. Won that game 20-3 in 5 innings.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff we could break down. Your initial impression of this matchup for Oklahoma?
It's big. This is a big one. I think I'm as intrigued at the matchup as I am to see how the team responds to a true road environment. I think that portion of things is going to be interesting. Now, I expect Oklahoma to travel well. I mean, it's not that far of a drive. They travel well anyways, but this series is going to tell us, just like last week, it's going to tell us a lot about this team. You go into this series not necessarily wounded because they're still undefeated, but I think last week South Carolina maybe showed some of the tendencies in the pitching staff, maybe some of the tendencies defensively that Arkansas might feel they can capitalize on. Because again, Arkansas is a really good offensive team. So I think that's what I would be looking for this week is can Oklahoma's defense make some of the adjustments that it needed to last week and ended up winning the ball game, that final game 3 that was just like totally different than the rest of the week. But on top of that, can the power hitting continue for Oklahoma? Because it has to slow down at some point, right?
So
and
at some point.
And if it doesn't, I mean, then it's just a continuation of what it's been the last 4 years. So
I think the biggest thing for me, Brian, now I will say, I mean, this Arkansas pitching staff, their ace, Robin Herron, legitimately, she's a good pitcher. 1.3 ERA, 56 strikeouts, only 8 earned runs in 42 innings. She's good. I don't know about the rest of their pitching staff. I'd be pretty surprised if OU's offense had any real issues. I'm not saying they're not going to, I don't know if they're going to score 20 runs through the first 2 games like they did against Ole Miss against South Carolina. But I don't think OU's going to get held scoreless or anything. I think they'll put up some runs. And especially for them to do that last weekend with Ella Parker going, I think 0 for 5 collectively at the plate. It was slow for Cassidy Pickering. This offense is proving that they've got other options outside of them. Yeah. My biggest question is what you're getting Sam Landry back, which is good. She played on Wednesday against Tulsa. She looked a little rusty early, and then she was great. Retired the side in order the last 2 innings she pitched. You're getting Sam Landry back. I would expect her to start in game 1. What does this pitching staff look like outside of her? Because Audrey Lowry was great in that game 3, but I just on the road against the South Carolina offense that statistically is even better than South Carolina's. If you don't get better showing from Isabella Smith, if you don't get more consistency from Kirsten Deal, I mean, this is an Arkansas team that could put up. I mean, they could put up 15 runs on a game or in a game this weekend. They could. Yep. Now, I'm not saying that'll happen, but also part of it is, I mean, Oklahoma had an error, at least one error in all 3 games.
Yes.
year. So like last weekend. So you're still, I think everyone's still trying to find their footing. And so even with how as good as Audrey Lowry played, is she the second pitcher? Who is the second pitcher? What does the rotation look like behind Sam Landry? How much does Sam Landry play? Does she just play in one game? Do they bring her in relief in a second or a third game? And I think these are important questions that they still got to figure out. And you're having to do that on the road in your first SEC series against an Arkansas team that's second in the nation in scoring, and just, I mean, they got a bounce back win on Sunday, but kind of got embarrassed against Ole Miss and are going to be looking for payback.
Yep.
So I think that's the number one question I want to answer this weekend is the Audrey Lowry stuff for real? Is she ready to be a contributor, or like a big time contributor as a true freshman?
Yeah.
And what does the pitching staff as a whole look like? Because last weekend didn't do a whole lot to quiet any doubts about this pitching staff. It's still early in the year. Arkansas is going to put up runs. Again, I said this last weekend, I'd be shocked if Oklahoma sweeps this. I'd be shocked. Well, actually, I'm not going to say that anymore. I would be pretty surprised if Oklahoma sweeps this.
Yeah.
On the road, Arkansas will get one, probably. I don't know. Yeah. What's the biggest thing? What's the biggest thing you're looking for?
I think that's right. You nailed it with Sam Landry and Audrey Lowry. Is that your 1-2? Do you feel pretty good about that coming out of this?
What about this offense?
Last week was kind of an anomaly.
Yeah.
You don't see Oklahoma. You haven't seen Oklahoma give up 19 runs in a weekend in a while. It doesn't feel like that's just not something. So, but yeah, as you just mentioned, on the offensive side, do we see Ella Parker and Cassidy Pickering kind of return to form? Like, is there a rebound coming here where they kind of start looking more like the players that we had seen in previous weeks? And if they do, does the offense mesh and it continues? Like, do they continue just this onslaught? Because I think you're right. Like I said last weekend, fireworks are kind of expected with this game. And I think this game kind of fits that same mold. I'm with you. If Oklahoma sweeps this, if Oklahoma was to sweep this series and start off 6-0 after having in SEC play after starting out against a South Carolina team that's a lot better than expected, I think it's time to start taking Oklahoma seriously as not just a team that should make the Women's College World Series, but like this team might have an elite ceiling still, which is just like wild to me.
Even if they just win this series, I mean, I don't know if this team has a ton of questions or like a ton of things to prove. I think they've done enough, but if they even if they start 5-1 through these two series, I mean, I think anybody holding out any kind of questions about this team would surely answer it. Winning this series in Arkansas would be impressive. It would.
Oh yeah,
it would.
This is the toughest. Well, I say that.
It's a really tough play.
Yeah, Tuscaloosa and Gainesville are going to be hard. And I think Gainesville is probably going to be your hardest. That'll be your hardest road series. But Fayetteville, especially in the times when they've been hosting regionals and here as of late, like they get wild for softball.
Yeah,
like they really enjoy. I mean, that's a great home field environment. So it's going to be tough. Like it's going to be a tough series for Oklahoma to go in and maintain composure.
Well, not only to mention that as impressive, this is not a knock on Oklahoma at all. It's so impressive that they swept last weekend. It's so impressive. They answered a ton of questions I had about this team. Not 8 times out of 10, or if this is a non-Patty Gasso team playing last weekend, they lose one of those games. I mean, they were down 5-1 in one of those games. I mean, both of those first 2 games go 10-9. Yeah. And with like in that first game, I mean, they not only went down, or in one of those games, they not only went down 5-1, they were down 8-6 late in that game. Most teams probably lose that.
Yeah.
So going on the road, and if Oklahoma, that's, I think for me, it's just get a series win. A
Yep.
sweep would be spectacular.
Yep.
Just go get a win.
Yep.
Would be really damn impressive.
Mm-hmm.
It really would. Brian, I think that's going to do it for us here on this episode of the Oklahoma Drill. Appreciate you guys as always tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe here at this YouTube channel, this OU Insider YouTube channel, so you don't miss a single thing that we're doing here. If you're not a VIP member over at OUinsider.com, never a better time to go check it out than it is right now. You'll have coverage from me this weekend in Fayetteville as I get to see Hog Nation, people calling the Hogs in Fayetteville. Also, it's near my stomping grounds. I grew up an hour outside of Fayetteville, so Fayetteville was the big city for me growing up in Stillwell, Oklahoma. Should be a lot of fun. A lot of content you guys aren't going to want to miss, both here at this YouTube channel and over at OUinsider.com. Check those out now. And until then, we'll be back. We'll actually be back, let's say Monday, for a recap of this Arkansas series on Quick Slants. And then we'll be back later next week for another episode of the Oklahoma Drill. Till then, we'll see you guys next time.